Welcome to No Man's an Island, a podcast powered by Men's Therapy Hub, which is a directory of male therapists for male clients. Now, Jett and I have been chatting about doing an episode each month or so where we discuss an issue in more detail. Could be something that's come up from a guest in a previous episode, or just something we're interested in diving into. Now, I spoke to Professor Ben Hine in episode 13. He's somebody who specializes in family breakdown and what's known as parental alienation post-separation. It's actually a great episode, and I can highly recommend going and listening to it if you haven't already, perhaps even before you start this one. Struggling after relationship breakdown is something I already knew was a big issue for men, but I hadn't really properly looked into it. So after the episode with Ben, I did, and wow. Ben told us that research showed men are about 9 times more likely to experience suicidal ideation after relationship breakdown. And there's a lot of research to back that up. For those that don't know, the 3 stages of suicide are suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation, where you actually consider how you might end your life, and then suicide completion, which is self-explanatory. You might think it's a bigger issue for older men, but actually, separated men under the age of 35 are much more likely to end their life compared to married men. And then came the kicker for me from Ben in that episode. The research he carried out found that 42% of fathers involved in relationship breakdown had some suicidal ideation. And as I pointed out, those were, first of all, the men that were still alive. And as Ben pointed out, those were self-selecting because they were men already involved in support services. So I spoke to Jett about this as an issue, and of course, as therapists specializing in working with men, it's an issue that we both see. And I also thought, well, I'm recently married, been married a couple of years, and I know Jett's married, and Jett also has kids, so he has more skin in the game, and maybe I shouldn't say that, but it feels at least that way. So Jett, to begin with, as I said before we came on, I just want to kind of throw you the ball here and say, like, what does this mean to you, first of all? I'd like to talk about our own personal experiences to begin with, before we get into the kind of wider conversation.
I think it's something that comes up so frequently in therapy. You can't avoid it, right? This isn't something that, maybe some therapists see and some don't. I think even regardless of gender, there is partner loss, family loss. And we could sort of expand what loss means. Does it mean loss of the romantic relationship itself? Does it mean death? Does it mean loss of a fantasy you had about the person that's now met with the reality of who a person is? So it's such an expansive way of looking at it. I think the more existential terror is the death of a loved one. And there are so many factors that go into that. There are so many, the roots come from so many different places. We could look at attachment, which maybe we can talk about in a minute. We could talk about trauma. Those are 2 big factors that can play into your experience or of loss or your anticipation of it. And so with men, you're looking at how we're socialized. And so we're going to experience that in a different way based on our socialization. And, it can, the thought of loss can activate aloneness, alienation, shame. And then what do men do with that typically? What's part of our socialization? Well, we can go into controlling mode, grandiosity, or we could preemptively withdraw from it, from a partner or from kids that you might have fears about losing. And so, I'm going to go even farther and say we can just pull back even more and not even look at this psychologically, but look at it sociology. Like, we're living in a time where, at least in heterosexual relationships, fewer women are dependent on men to provide for them, at least financially. And so there's a lot of guys that at least I see in my practice where there's just a general confusion, kind of like a fog, where they feel in relationships like we're being asked to bring more to the table as emotionally dynamic beings. And so romantic partners play a bigger role maybe they did in previous generations. We talk more about that because, it's it's a different time. And so I think there's the larger social economic picture too that plays into all this. So I'll pause there because it's just I've covered way too much territory.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of the point of this is, you know, the things that were on my mind really were the shame and the social isolation, and those are things that I want to get into. But you've touched upon there part of the reason why I wanted to do this, and I do this fully with my wife's permission, by the way, to talk about this. I spoke to her about it this morning just to check. She doesn't listen anyway, so it's not a problem. My wife and I got married 2.5 years ago. And she passed her driving test 6 months ago. So for the first time in her life, she gets the keys to the car and she goes out and she's driving to work. And I remember this feeling as she leaves the house of being stood there and having dread, actual dread of what happens if she crashes, what happens if anything. And then suddenly I'm realizing that I'm facing a kind of a beast almost of a potential crisis should it happen. And I start to realize that this is what it's like when you are deeply connected to somebody. And you mentioned there the existential dread. It's the fear of the loss, because let's talk about that first. You are also a father. You know, if anything will happen to your wife, you would be left with the 2 kids on your own. That would be a big challenge, of course. But how much do you think that is the biggest fear that men in relationships have?
I don't know if it's the biggest fear. I know it is a fear, and one that I, like you, and I appreciate you sharing that, have also felt and feel. You're right. I have more skin in the game, quite literally. I have 2 daughters, and it's the way that I think about that is, and I'm just putting my therapist hat on as I listen to you, and I think even just thinking about myself being my own therapist. It's like, man, that is the dark side of love. And so I'm flipping it, meaning that you don't get love. You don't have the privilege of love, I'll call it, without the underbelly of loss. They come in a package. And so for some men, I think about, I'll even say that, I'm like, man, you love this person. You know, they're talking about the loss and all the fears, and I frame it that way for them. It's like, yeah, this is the sacrifice you make to say yes to that, to the vulnerability of that. And so it's actually helpful because not to just, detract from or deflect from the fears and walking them down that dark path, which I do. I said I want to go to that place. But initially I might flip it and say, yeah, this is the byproduct of loving someone deeply. And it's actually soothing in some ways to hear that reframe on it. But it doesn't mean that I won't go down that dark path. And that's been helpful to me when I think about just like the health and well-being of my family, that love is worth it to me. And so that's the way that I would frame it. I don't know if I fully answered your question, but maybe ask it again and I'll give you a more direct answer.
It's a beautiful answer, and it's kind of existentialism in a sense, right? It's 'tis better to have loved and lost, yada yada. And I do agree with that, and I do understand that. It doesn't take away from the reality of the lived experience day to day that many men have of what if I lose everything that I have built. And those statistics there kind of speak for themselves in a sense. And I wonder what it is from your perspective. What have you seen in the work that you've done?
Mm-hmm.
And also from your own personal experience, what is it, do you think, about male socialization that means that when a relationship does break down, that men fare so much worse statistically?
Yep. I mean, there's just so much there to try to unpack. It's like, what are we placing on our relationships? They're also sometimes an extension of ourself. that, I'll maybe get a little bit academic when I think about it, but there's a term called self-object. It sounds kind of strange, right? It's this guy, his name's Heinz Kohut, I think in the 50s and 60s. He created a whole brand of therapy. I'm not going to go into that, but a self-object is someone who is performing like pretty essential psychological functions that maintain yourself, cohesion, your self-esteem as a guy. So a lot, when you go into therapy, you think about, well, is your partner, are you experiencing them as a separate individual or just an extension of yourself? Like who's soothing you, who's mirroring you, who can idealize. And so the terror of loss from that standpoint can just be looked at. Is it about her or him, if it's a romantic relationship, or it's about losing the sense of self that only is kept together in your partner's presence. It's why some guys will get really, really frantic when their relationships end. It's like they're not always mourning the person. Sometimes they are, if it's, a healthy, loving relationship, but there's a narcissism to it. Then they're experiencing, oh my gosh, like, who am I? I'm going to break apart without this person who's regulating me, even at the nervous system level. So that's kind of one more psychoanalytic actually way of looking at it. But that's personality. But then there's also trauma too. Like what have you experienced in your earlier relationships? What wounds do you have from previous relationships, caregiver, that would tell you that loss is inevitable? It's like, what scripts are running within you that we have to unpack and give some airtime to? And a lot of times, people have been broken earlier in their life. And so they project that fear onto their partners or their kids. And so if you've been abandoned and you're walking into a new relationship, that is a vulnerable thing to do. And so you start to place some of these intolerable fears and say, okay, well, what if it happens to them? And so there's trauma in there, and that's a whole other episode, right? Like that we could go into. And within that, I'm bringing a lot of stuff here from the psychology world, but there's
you always do, Jett.
Anxious attachment too, which I'm not going to just dive into that, but it's related to all this because that's the template of how we experience relationships through attachment. We call it internal working models about the reliability of connection. And so all of these are just different ways of like looking at this big issue of like, what happens if I lose it all? And I'll say one more thing and then I'll shut up, is that for men, I think that we are socialized, finally to get to your point, that there is like an existential, I've called it the existential load. I wrote about this actually once in Psychology Today. And basically it's that like what I am a reflection of what I can build and provide, and that I earn, therefore I am. And so in the sense, it's like what I build in this family. I'm driving this bus. So a lot of men take on this load in their families, no matter how big they are. Like, I have to drive the bus. I was talking to a guy recently, men are much more likely to focus on saving and investing, right? Looking at this sort of homeland security in the general sense of, I'm responsible for, keeping this together, even if I have a partner who makes more money than me. Like, this isn't so much about money. It's about like
stasis.
Thank you for that language. Yes. And so if that starts to fall apart, you're like, holy shit, I'm a failure. I am a failure as a human, but I'm a failure as a man. I'm not performing is the key word there. My sacred duty to keep shit in order, to drive this bus, to keep us secure. And so then you devolve into shame, right? Of being defective and a failure and a bad provider and protector.
And you kind of encapsulated it at the end there. This failure potentially of the provider protector, and if a relationship breaks down, you no longer have somebody to provide and protect. And interestingly, I didn't say stasis; I said status. But you heard stasis. But stasis was a great word too. But in essence, it is the stasis of the status, right?
Perfect.
And the status, I think, is a huge thing, because there has been in the past 20, 30 years this huge movement for women of like the strong independent woman, like the single woman who doesn't need a man. And I know that there has been the kind of red pill narrative around that, but these men, unfortunately, they don't really project groundedness and stability in it. It seems to be coming from a place of anxiety and fear. And perhaps it is too from the other side a little bit. But when I speak to young boys in schools, or when I used to, and I used to ask them like what their dream life looked like, it was always, we talked about the markers of esteem. And it was always big wife, big house, nice car, hot wife, right? And it was often in that order, because, first you get the power, then you get the money, then you get the women, right? That was, that's the Scarface line that I used to make the joke about. And this was true working with adult men as well. It was the get the house, get the car, get the wife, right? And it's like, once you've got these markers of esteem in place, then I wonder if there's also a kind of external thing here, that to have somebody who vouches for you, have a woman who vouches for you in some way as a man, particularly these days, perhaps with the rhetoric around men, gives you like a badge of acceptance that you can walk around the world with and say, well, I'm spoken for. Like at least one woman has said I am a viable man. And you have that stripped away from you maybe when a relationship breaks down, and suddenly you're left with a sense of incompleteness, perhaps.
Yep. And that's a very good plain language version of what I was trying to say with the self-object before, is that sometimes a partner is an extension of your masculine identity, as opposed to their own separate being with thoughts, fears, beliefs, their own terrors, right? And so what you're saying, and I agree, is that actually that a loss of that sort would mean a failure also of a masculine achievement, right? The marker of status, or status, as I would say, as an American.
That's why you didn't understand status rather than stasis.
Vast cultural differences between us. Real men keep their women in a heterosexual dynamic. And look, I think that adding to that is that men are more likely now to have like a pretty impoverished social, emotional support networks, and so a lot of that is lumped onto their romantic partner. And so what ends up happening is that the romantic partner becomes all things. They become a one-stop shop for intimacy, emotional regulation, sense of self, identity. And so then what ends up happening is that too much is placed. And so what happens with the fear of loss? Well, if I lose that, then I lose so much, because so much is resting on this one person. That's why male friendships, male spaces are so important.
Which again is something that we spoke about in episode 12, which was about the male loneliness. And that is kind of the elephant in the room here, which is the research shows that one of the main reasons is because women have a much broader, grander safety net post-separation, post-divorce, to fall into the arms, quite literally, to fall into the arms of a rich social network that they have been better at maintaining. And again, we're generalizing, not all women, not all men, right? Like,
yep.
And of course, there are men out there who are fantastic at developing rich social networks, but the statistics don't lie about this, that men experience loneliness at a much greater rate. So therefore, it would make sense that post-separation, men are much more likely to fall into a deeper sense of loneliness because perhaps, as you've articulated there, they've invested they've put all of their chips on the wife table, right? And they've gone all in on that. And if that breaks down, there are no chips elsewhere. And how much is this, in a sense, like a kind of warning to us as men to not do that and to try to keep those friendships going, even regardless of how fucking annoying your mates are sometimes. If there's someone who might be there for you in a crisis, give them a call once in a while because you never know when you might need them.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's at the very least. Don't keep your male friendships on a shelf to collect dust. Grow them, water them, or water them and grow them. And I don't know. I think I don't have the male loneliness data at hand, but I think that I've been thinking a lot just by myself about like alienation and loneliness. And I know Ben Heinen talked about alienation, but they're separate. Like loneliness is the desire for relationships and meeting the reality that they're not there in the way that you want them to be, the same depth. Whereas alienation is like a separation between two things that ought to be together. Like, men are alienated from maybe their roles of being a provider. There's wage stagnation. There aren't jobs in the same industries like there were, right? We're alienated from just the natural human yearning to be connected to other men. Like, so those two things that ought to be are not together. They're alienated. They're separated. And I think there's a lot of men out there who actually feel, to use the word alien, like in their home or their home country or walking the streets. It's like, this is where I'm supposed to belong, but I don't. Is that because of discrimination? Is that because of just social economic changes? Like, my life doesn't look like my dad's life, right? And so I think that is a big part of it too, is that objectively the world around us has changed, right? Like, we're alienated from the job availabilities that we had, the friendships, our role in a romantic relationship as, the breadwinner, or people will listen to me when I speak, or when I need time alone, I get that time alone without asking. Like, all those things, but those, some of this we have to accept, like what I just said, but some other of it is like, other aspects of it is beyond our control. So there's a separation, and I think that brings about the sense of like deep loneliness too. Do you get where I'm going with that? I'm just kind of like workshopping that out there. I don't know if I really nailed it, but
and this is where I kind of want to ask you, that alienation, what Ben Hein talked about was parental alienation, is where post-separation, one parent, and actually it's not gendered, and you would think that it is, but one parent will actively alienate the other parent from the children by obfuscating, lying, manipulating them to hate the other parent, so that the kids don't want to see them, and of course that, as he talked about, like deeply affects the kids' attachment system. But from your perspective, can you understand as a parent the pain that a lot of men must feel, because it is usually the men that leave the family home, and this is, whether it's active alienation or not, you are still being ostracized from the family unit, the day-to-day family unit. Like, what impact would that have on a man? And like, can you imagine what impact that would have on you if suddenly that was taken from you in that way?
And that's it, is that you have to step in to their shoes as men who are alienated in that way. It would be devastating. Yes. I've imagined it, and I do with my clients who are facing that. And we've talked about a lot here already. I think one of the things that men need, this is my opinion, is just, that's devastating. It feels unfair, or it is objectively unfair. And like, let silence ring out a little bit. Like just sitting with that there's someone else sees it fully. How awful that is, without trying to fix it. Like just letting them have that moment.
Well, you're not a couples counselor, so you can't really fix it. Like, that's not your job as the therapist to go in and try and fix them. It's to be with them in that reality.
That's right. And I don't want to lose sight of that either. In a role as therapist, it might seem like totally obvious, but that isn't. If you're not, if you haven't experienced, if you haven't been in therapy or you're going through this, like who's going to give you that? Who's going to offer you that space and not sugarcoat things? Right? You might talk to someone else like, "Oh, but you're such a good guy. You'll pick up. You'll
plenty more fish in the sea."
Right? There's plenty more. The happy talk isn't helpful, and so you kind of have to sit with them in the muck before you even think about entering reframing mode, which I've talked about before, or problem solving, which all can be valuable in therapy, but there's a time and a place for it, and so. We have to, as therapists, I think we really have to stretch ourselves and not just listen, but listen in a way where like you are in that man, you're inhabiting that man's inner life and seeing how crushing it is, and maybe giving him language for it, like that new language to help organize the experience.
And if you have been in a quote happy relationship, if such a thing exists, a well-functioning relationship, let's call it, where tactility, for example, has been a big part of it, and like you have 2 daughters, I can only imagine that you are like a walking oxytocin bomb every day. Like to have that taken. So that maybe you only see your kids weekends. Maybe you never get to hug that person again, whether it be a wife or a partner, depending on your sexuality, but you've had somebody there to co-regulate with, as you mentioned before. There's also the somatic withdrawal, in a sense, that you don't get that hug from your daughter every day. You don't get that hug from your partner every day. You don't get that moment of connection every day. Suddenly you're in a flat on your own 5 days a week. And then when your kids do come, they're a bit weirded out because it's not their usual space. And like, why are you here, Daddy? This is strange. And, suddenly everything is different. And it's not just the status, the impacts of stasis. I like that. I'm going to use that. There's also, and of course, the kind of cognitive challenges that come with it, the finances and all of that too. There is this kind of somatic bodily change that you are extricated from this environment suddenly and put into a new environment where you don't get all of those creature comforts, those home comforts that you've been so used to.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
I'm not trying to scare you here, Jett, by the way.
No. I mean, I have thought about it. So you're not taking me to a place, which says something. You're not taking me to a place I haven't been, at least in my imagination. And there's a time to meet the reality of it. But as I suggested before, but then it's like it's part of the trauma of it all. I don't necessarily mean that in a PTSD way. I just mean that in a general, trauma, small t trauma maybe, although it can be a big T trauma, is that it's the fantasy of what this relationship would be has now been totally upended into something different. It's really hard to reconcile what we had hoped versus what we are experiencing. And that's part of our work as therapists too, is like reconciling those two. How do you do that? It's not so easy. You have to give it space and time. And there are moments for reframe, but I think in the early stages of that, it's like, how can you then focus on presence? Like, what are your values in as a dad, whether you're, a resident dad or not? Like, what are your, well, a lot of times when I ask dads that question, in this case, we're talking about fathers, it's presence. They really care about presence. When we think about values, being present emotionally, physically, obviously, in their kids' lives. And so it's like, okay, how can we maximize that in the reality of you being, having 50-50 separation or a 2-2-2-3 arrangement in a divorce or something like that. Like 2 days, 3 days. And it's like, okay, well, I've seen divorced dads thrive in the sense that, okay, now the time that I do have with my kid has to be very, very focused with love and care and interest and listening. And
Active.
Exactly. Active. So you take for granted, I might take for granted, I probably do take for granted that I'm a resident father. That's a privilege, man. That is. And that if it were something else, I might have to focus on how can I maximize, I don't want to blink in the time that I do have with my kid.
The very fact, as you said, that this is something that you have contemplated shows just how fearful that can be for guys to step into. And I wonder what your advice is to the men that you see, or what you kind of work towards with those men, because they do have to try to fill a space that was once filled with a person or one person and one or two small people that isn't there anymore. And that I go back to the fear of losing my wife, on the road. What would happen if she just didn't come home? What would I do? I'd be in this house and it would be empty and she would never come back. And what? It's almost, I can't really fathom what that would feel like, because I've experienced heartbreak before. My previous relationship breakdown. I have experienced deep heartbreak, but this, I almost don't want to think about it, but I can't not think about it.
Yes. And the more you avoid it, the more it comes back with a vengeance. So I don't know if this is advice, but it's have someone you trust. It's not, the person that you fear losing, walk you down that dark alley. And so sometimes it's scary for me, even as a therapist, to walk someone down that and be like, okay, this is conquering your mind. Let's go there. I'll go there with you. Okay. Tell me how she's going to die. Okay. I won't sugarcoat it with, not be there anymore. Right. And in the ways that we do to make just the terror of death seem nicer. In plain language, I'll just go with them. Okay, then what would be the first thing you do when you wake up? Is that a survivable event? Is that I'll do this with myself too. In a way, it's harder though. You want to be able to do it with someone else, and I'll just let them go there. I'll walk down to that dark place with them, and it doesn't solve it, but you're seen in the most terrible state that you can imagine being in. Do you see what I'm saying? It's that is an intervention too. We forget about it. It's go to that place. It's exposure. It's imaginal exposure, as we call it in the psychology world.
Surprise, surprise, the therapists are suggesting that you have to sit with your emotion and your pain.
Well, guess what? I use this metaphor. If you walk into a department store and walk out humming a song, right? And you just can't get it out of your head. It's just taking over. Well, it isn't to say, stop thinking about it. I can't believe let me push it away. Let me just sing another song. It's actually to sing it. To sing it with a little bit more gusto, maybe. I don't know. So that's a nice, pleasant example that I'm using for something that's quite dark. And look, I have kids. I've thought about this. This is my biggest fear, right? That as it relates to the health and well-being of my kids, of course, every day. It creeps in somewhere, somehow. So much so that I use the word it, because it's hard to even talk about it, And so, I think I go back to the very first thing I said. Yeah, like I love these kids, and this is the baggage of love.
Yeah, and like you spoke about so beautifully at the start, it's part of the deal. It's if you want this love, if you want this family life, it comes with risk.
Yes.
And I wonder if that's part of the challenge for single men, even still now, and separated men, is, dusting yourself down and climbing back into the ring and saying, well, actually, we go again. Because one of the things I've said to my wife is, like, she hates this. She's much more avoidant than me. She says, so I've said to her, like, if anything ever happens to me, you have to keep going. Like, you have to go again. You have to believe that this exists because we have experienced it together, right? Spot the romantic in the relationship. But I wonder if that's such a big thing for guys, because as we talked about before, that loss of the status and the kind of the big fall. Why would I bother risking that again? Why would I bother trying to find that again when all it's going to do is hurt me? I know there's not a question there.
No,
It's just
I'm just sort of, I'm reflecting on it because I think, what you want to tell her is a reflection of what you want to hear too from her, perhaps. Because I've told versions of that to my wife too. It's like, go on, I give her a resilient, pep talk in the case of the worst. But secretly, not so secretly, that's also like what I want her to, to tell me.
Yeah, okay.
So, but I will say that all of what we're talking about can lead men to do controlling behaviors, grandiose behaviors, withdraw behaviors. And so the fears that we hold can manifest in really destructive ways, relationship-wise.
Tell me more about that.
Well, I mean, what do we do with shame as guys? We quickly transform it because it's intolerable into, we go big, right? We become more stern and more resolute and more assertive, but really it's aggressive and intimidating. Or we go into something more narcissistic, and we talk about, we say things passive aggressively about how we're, we could pull chicks or, find another woman or find another partner,
or win in every fight we ever have.
Exactly right. Rewrite history. And to me, those are all destructive ways, and we have to be aware of it and catch ourselves in those moments. Because real confidence is maybe what this all comes down to, is living with that fear. It's not going to go away. That's my stance. We're not going to eliminate our fears that we've talked about today, but real healthy self-confidence doesn't mean not having fears. No. It's having the fear and, as we say in the psychology world, like holding that dialectic and being the partner, present, loving, caring, thoughtful partner. So it's not elimination. This isn't a complete, let's eradicate this fear somehow, get it out of my mind. No, it's going to show up. I promise you it's going to show up if you're in the love game, if you're truly loving. Healthy self-confidence is having it and still being the person, the guy that you want to show up in the world as.
Which is understandable for those still in the relationship. Once the relationship has ended, based on everything that we've said, I guess what we're actually talking about here is a massive knock to self-esteem, and therefore, if we don't have the foundations of self-worth, which I think maybe we should do an entire episode on, because I think for me, understanding the difference between self-esteem and self-worth was revolutionary in my own life.
Could you say that? If you can remember it offhand, I would love to hear how you would distinguish it.
So self-esteem is what we think and feel and believe about ourselves, and usually that's based on external factors. So it's how we perceive others to perceive us, right? Or how we perceive others perceive us. And self-worth is the recognition that I'm greater than all of those things. So I don't need the external validation continually to know that I'm a good person, that I'm okay, actually. And when you've been knocked off your perch, as I have been, and you have been dragged through the mud, and you have all of that esteem taken away, to build up a sense of self-worth and say, like, okay, but none of that actually changes who I am as a person. Oh, okay. And for those on the podcast right now, I have my finger pointing. I'm in aggressive mode right now. Like, that's fucking hard. That's probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, is to develop that sense of worth. So if you have put all of your markers of esteem on this relationship, and your esteem is taken away from you because a relationship ends, and probably somebody is saying nasty things about you too, which doesn't help, then you can fall into this pit of despair. I talk about having the rug whipped from underneath you, and you fall down into a pit of despair. And so if you don't have that self-worth to hold you up, then you do automatically then lose a shit ton of self-confidence. And actually, one of the biggest ways that men will try to mask that would be through drug and alcohol, through escapist methods, which men are much more likely to use, and the most likely ones would be drugs and alcohol. You know, I've had clients say to me, like, oh no, I'm in a super happy, comfortable relationship. Okay, well, you know, we play out what would happen if it ends. Oh, well, I'd definitely go back to using drugs. And it's like, well, what? Okay. Doesn't sound so happy and healthy if that's... It sounds like all of your eggs are in that basket. You know, all that chips are on one hand on the table.
Yeah.
So to lose that confidence for men, you know, I've got it written down here. Like one of my clients said recently, I have a book of smart things me and my clients say in sessions, which is a separate book to my client notes. And he said that for him, the thing that he needs to show all the time is competent, capable, confident. Those are the 3 C's. I must be competent, capable, confident. And to have a relationship taken away in some way affects all 3 of those, but particularly the confidence. And to recover from that loss of confidence as a man, to try, and this is not to say that developing self-esteem is bad. To regain some of that self-esteem is really tricky when you have put most of it in the hands of a partner.
Yes. Yeah. Another case to be made that we have to expand our portfolio of relationships as men, like that we are relational creatures, and we're not on an island, to use the name of the podcast. But yeah, that distinction between self-esteem and self-worth is was helpful. It's a good way of putting it,
because it's saying, yes, I'm in a relationship with this amazing person, and yes, I do take a lot of joy and comfort and confidence from, I've got my best mate who bigs me up all the time, right? That is partly why I'm with her, because she talks me up some of the time. And yes, that would be hard if it went away. It would be the most difficult thing I will have ever experienced. And bear in mind, my dad died when I was 25, right? So it would be the most difficult thing I ever experienced. And yet, part of me has to recognize that I am greater than that, in a sense, that I still can be whole, and that I still can be me. It's going to take some time to get back, because grief is grief, and we have to allow the grief in. But that it doesn't say anything actually about me as an individual necessarily.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it really has me thinking, because what I've found is the more chips you put onto your romantic partner as your end-all be-all, right, the more likely it's going to be totally a sense of destruction, the anticipation of like total life destruction if that were all to end. But it's also like, yes, relationships to humans, like I'm going to center that. That's important. But it's just also having multiple parts of yourself that are in relationships with other things out there in the world too. Hobbies, passions, interests, causes, passion projects, being multidimensional, having, I think the term is self-complexity, right? Like that you're not
I like
just
that. I've never heard that before.
Actually, Richard Reeves talks about it in his book about men and self-complexity, is that that women tend to be more likely to have more understandings of who they are. I'm a mom. I'm a professional. I'm a collector of collector of something.
Collector of whatever it is people
right.
collect.
I read fantasy novels or romantic novels, and so men, I think, might have less identities that they take on, right? So just take a look at yourself. I really don't want to butcher that definition, but my main point here is that you want to have relationships to like multiple things. I do feel like that's a buffer against trauma and tragedy, is feeling like, okay, I am a multidimensional person with so many different like fallbacks that will help keep me up as I'm feeling collapsed.
I think the cliche for men often has been, or the stereotype has been, that men are quite simple creatures, right?
Yeah, true.
And then I think, okay, we're talking here about one of the biggest predictors of suicide in men being relationship breakdown. And one of the other biggest predictors, because during the financial crash of 07-08 in the UK, the rate of male suicide spiked almost identically to the rate of male unemployment. So it's like, are our identities wrapped up in provider protector? Like, I am the provider for my family. I have a job, therefore I am. Or I love and I protect my family, therefore I am. And if we take away one of, God forbid, both of those things, what are we left with? And maybe we're left with a not so complex being. So maybe sometimes, like some stereotypes, there is some accuracy in them. And so maybe this is what this podcast, I mean, yeah, no man's an island. You're literally making me want to call my friends now and have this conversation to say, like, you're all married. Like, what the hell do we do if that ever falls down? Like, can we make sure we're all there for each other? Because I know that we will be, but just like, can we just like solidify that? Like, please sign here to say that you'll be there if anything happens. Because
turn into a contract.
Right.
Send the contract out to them.
Because I have two older brothers, right? And I actually know that if anything happened to me, like seriously financially, I know that they would support me, and vice versa. With my friends, I know that they'd be there for me, but that is something that we've cultivated over probably the last 10 years. Because 10 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to have the conversations we have now. And it it's what I used to say to the kids in the schools, which was like, you have to start practicing this now. If you start trying to practice this when you're 40 or 50, it's still better to start, but it's going to be way harder to start when you're 40 or 50 than you are when you're 14, 15.
Yes. Yeah, and indirectly, making yourself dynamic and three-dimensional, multidimensional, whatever word you want to use, I think it means that, having these conversations with friends, or, in your case, talking to your brother, or in my case, talking to my sister, it's a very hard thing to talk about, to bring up, because it would seem like quite a bummer, right? To have to talk about loss, in the few moments you have to converse with someone in, your family. It's time is becoming, there's less of it. And so that the time you do want to spend, you want to spend it talking about tragedy and loss too. Right. Yeah. But I think it's worth it.
Yeah. What's the one thing that you would want to leave listeners with from this? This is the first time we've done an episode like this where we sit and say, like, here's a topic, and maybe in the future we can be a bit more refined with it and we can work on it. We're all practicing, we're all learning. For those that are still listening at this point, what would you want to learn? What would you want to leave them with?
I'm going to say something that like isn't that profound, and maybe doesn't totally track with everything that we talked about, but it's maybe an add-on that I think about, and maybe in my own life, is like having some creative outlet as a buffer to loss, which is why art therapy can be so great, of a medium. But, I've always played music my whole life, and it's another form of emotion regulation for me. And so if you're a dad out there, or if you're like, it's never too late to start to express yourself in other ways outside of just talking. We do talk therapy, but there's so many ways to be expressive. And that having that is I have a relationship with music. Like I always know it's going to be there in some way, shape, or form. And I'm not doing it in an ambitious way. I'm doing it in a playful way, and in a way of like, it helps me be present and grounded. And so I'm just putting that out there as like, I don't know, it means buying an easel and watercolors, or what it means. It's tinkering, playing with your creativity, whether it's art or music or whatever. I want to add that because I do feel like it's often gets buried in there. And I have buried it because it's the last thing I'm saying in this, podcast. But that's what I would say. How about you?
I do this all the time. I ask you a question and then I think, shit, I know I have to answer it myself. So I'm gonna, people who know me, who listen to this, won't be surprised when I say I'm going to talk myself up a little bit here. I lost a friend called Charlie about, was it 8 years ago now? And his little brother, he's like 6'4", but anyway, his little brother was devastated, really struggling. And I had this conversation with him, and I forgot I had this conversation with him. And then he called me about a year or so later, and he said to me, "You said something when I was grieving that revolutionized the way that I thought about this." And I think this would be what I would say to men who are grieving, whether it be a death from a partner, or even just a relationship breakdown. And what he said was that I said, it's okay to be scared. It's okay to feel lonely. It's okay to be like abjectly miserable. It's okay to be a complete fucking mess. And it's okay to stand back up once all of that's over. And I thought to myself, wow, what a smart thing I said that I don't remember saying. And then I incorporated that into the work that I do. And I remember doing one of these fireside chats with a business once, and I started crying when I said this because I felt it so deeply, because at the time I was going through something and I was speaking it to myself. And it's that reminder that, yeah, relationship breakdown is going to be hard, but the world is a better place with you in it. So keep going, like keep fighting, keep standing up. Even if you fall down, like when a kid is learning to walk, it keeps standing up, even though it keeps falling down. And you have to keep going, because I say this to my clients all the time. It's like, I wish I could do this for you, but I can't. You have to do this yourself. And yeah, so you've done a preemptive thing, and yeah, put all of the preemptive things in place. But you could have the perfect system in place to catch you, and it's still going to hurt like shit when it happens. And all that you have is yourself to keep to say, I'm allowed to be a mess, and I'm also allowed to stand up and keep going.
And it's so wonderful. It's such a powerful thing to hear when you're in a really low spot. And not to, add another one onto that, but it got me thinking of what a supervisor once told me about talking to clients who are going through hell and who might be hopeless. It's like saying to them, it's okay if you don't have hope. I'll hold it for you.
Mm.
And
I'll give it you back when you're ready.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I personalized that too, right? In the same way that you did, but it just reminded me of it, because that's kind of like what you're telling them. Like, it's okay. Keep going. Like, and you're instilling, like you're showing them that you have the resilience even when they might not have it, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's to model it in a sense. and to model it and say, it's something that I'm not going to understand your experience. And this is as friends, like, we can't go in and say like, oh, I know what you're going through. Even if you've been through your own divorce, you don't know what somebody else is going through. You have an idea, but you can stand beside them and say, and I will be with you even in the darkest moments, so you're not alone. And that's the challenge, really, is how to not feel alone in that pain, because I think that's probably the scariest and most painful thing of all.
Yes.
Let's end on that cheery note. Thanks, Jett. I've enjoyed that. I would like to do more of these. And for those of you that are listening towards the end, I actually would be interested in feedback. Like, would you as a listener be interested in more of these sorts of episodes where Jett and I discuss issues, or do you just want to hear from our guests because they're more interesting than us? I would be interested to hear that. So thank you, Jett.
Thank you. This was awesome.
I really enjoyed that. I'll speak to you again soon. Thanks for listening to No Man's an Island. If you enjoyed this, please share, like, and subscribe so more people can join in the conversation. This podcast is powered by Men's Therapy Hub, where you'll find more resources, support, and a directory of male therapists for male clients. Don't forget to follow our Instagram and TikTok at Men's Therapy Hub. The music is by the Swedish artist Reindeer, spelled Raindear. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.